Before the judges even knew his name, before the lights fully warmed the stage, something unseen already wrapped itself around the hearts of millions watching, because the moment this boy opened his mouth, history was about to breathe again, and no one would leave unchanged. The theater was loud that night, filled with cheers, flashing lights, and the familiar buzz of anticipation. But backstage, standing barefoot on the cold floor, was a small Filipino boy clutching a microphone almost too big for his hands. His name was Miguel. He was only 12, thin as a reed, with nervous eyes that carried stories far older than his age. Back home in a modest neighborhood in the Philippines, the power went out often, meals were simple, and dreams were usually kept quiet so they wouldn't hurt too much when reality came knocking. Yet tonight, Miguel stood on one of the biggest stages in the world, America's Got Talent, carrying not just his dream, but the weight of an entire nation's hope. Miguel's journey to this moment had not been easy. His father worked long hours as a tricycle driver, his mother sold homemade snacks just to help pay school fees. Music was never supposed to be a career, it was a comfort. Miguel learned to sing by listening to his grandmother hum old patriotic songs while cooking rice over a single burner. Lupang Hinirang, the Philippine national anthem, was more than a song in their home, it was a prayer, a reminder of struggle, resilience, and pride. When his grandmother passed away, Miguel sang Lupang Hinirang at her funeral, his voice shaking but strong. That was the first time people cried when they heard him sing. Fast forward to the AGT stage. Simon Cowell leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, the way he always did when he wasn't convinced yet. The audience smiled politely, unsure what to expect from a shy boy with a thick accent and trembling hands. When asked what he would sing, Miguel hesitated for a second, then said softly, "I will sing the song of my country." A few eyebrows lifted. It wasn't a pop hit. It wasn't flashy. But Miguel nodded, closed his eyes, and began. The first note was gentle, almost fragile. The theater grew quiet. By the second line, something changed. Miguel's voice grew fuller, carrying emotion that no vocal training could teach. It wasn't about hitting perfect notes, it was about truth. His voice carried the sound of typhoons endured, of families separated by work abroad, of children growing up too fast but still believing in tomorrow. As he sang, images flashed in his mind, his parents watching on a cracked phone screen, his neighbors crowding around a small TV, his grandmother's smile. Halfway through the anthem, the audience was already standing. Some placed hands over their hearts. Others wiped tears without realizing when they started crying. Then the camera cut to Simon Cowell. For the first time that night, his arms were no longer crossed. His jaw tightened. His eyes glistened. As Miguel reached the final line, his voice soared, not loud, but powerful, like a promise carried on the wind. When the last note faded, there was a pause. 1 second. 2. Then the entire theater erupted. Cheers thundered like waves crashing against a shore. Miguel stood frozen, eyes wide, tears streaming down his face. He bowed slightly, unsure what to do with the overwhelming love pouring toward him. Simon stood up. Slowly. The crowd gasped. "I've judged thousands of performances," he said, voice breaking, "but what you did, that wasn't just singing. That was reminding us why music matters." He paused, wiping his face. "You didn't just represent your country, you honored it." Simon Cowell, known for his toughness, was crying openly now. Back home, Miguel's parents fell to their knees. His father covered his face, sobbing. His mother hugged the screen as if she could reach through it. In that moment, every sacrifice, every missed meal, every prayer whispered in the dark felt worth it. Miguel didn't just advance in the competition that night, he became a symbol. A reminder that talent can rise from anywhere, that pride in one's roots is a strength, not a weakness, and that even the smallest voice can shake the world when it sings from the heart. And if this story moved you even a little, if you felt that lump in your throat or that spark of hope, don't let it end here. Like this video to support stories that inspire, subscribe to the channel so you never miss moments that remind us of our shared humanity, and share this with someone who needs to believe that dreams, no matter how small they begin, can echo across the world. Because sometimes, One song is enough to change everything. Before a single note was sung, before the judges leaned forward in their chairs, something invisible already pulled the viewers closer, because this was one of those moments where you feel it in your chest and you just know you're about to witness something unforgettable, the kind of performance people talk about years later. The stage lights of America's Got Talent burned bright, but standing at the center was a small Filipino boy who looked almost swallowed by the space around him. His name was Joshua, 11 years old, shoulders tense, hands shaking slightly as he held the microphone. The crowd smiled kindly, some whispering, unsure what to expect. From the outside, he looked like just another hopeful kid. But inside him lived a story shaped by sacrifice, distance, and an unbreakable love for his country. Joshua grew up in a coastal town in the Philippines where mornings began with roosters crowing and nights ended with the sound of waves hitting the shore. His mother worked overseas as a domestic helper, calling home whenever she could. His father stayed behind, raising Joshua and his younger sister, teaching them to be strong even when life felt unfair. Music became Joshua's escape. Every Monday morning at school, he sang Lupang Hinirang with his classmates, chest lifted, voice steady, imagining his mother hearing him somehow, wherever she was in the world. When Joshua was chosen to audition for AGT, his family sold what little they could afford: an old motorbike, a small television, just to help cover travel costs. People told them it was too risky, too impossible. But Joshua remembered his mother's words, "If your heart believes, your voice will follow." That belief carried him thousands of miles from home to this stage. Simon Cowell watched quietly as Joshua introduced himself. When the boy said he would sing the Philippine national anthem, there was a brief silence. It wasn't a safe choice. It wasn't trendy. Simon raised an eyebrow, skeptical but curious. The music began, soft, simple. Joshua closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and sang. The first line was gentle, almost fragile, but filled with sincerity. As his voice echoed through the theater, the audience leaned in. By the second verse, the emotion deepened. Joshua wasn't just singing words, he was telling a story of colonization, struggle, pride, and hope. His voice trembled not from fear, but from feeling. Each note carried memories of early mornings without his mother, of letters read again and again, of a boy growing up faster than he should have. The camera cut to the judges. Sophia's eyes were glossy. Howie pressed his lips together, nodding slowly. Then there was Simon. His usual sharp expression softened. As Joshua reached the anthem's final lines, his voice soared clear, strong, unwavering. The room felt suspended in time. When the song ended, there was silence so deep it felt sacred. Then the crowd rose as one. Thunderous applause filled the hall. Joshua stood there, stunned, tears rolling down his cheeks. Simon stood up too. His voice cracked as he spoke. "I've heard incredible singers," he said, pausing, visibly emotional, "but what you gave us tonight was heart, history, and truth. That's why everyone here felt it." He wiped his eyes. "You made us proud to be human." Back in the Philippines, Joshua's family watched on a borrowed television. His sister screamed with joy. His father cried openly. And across the ocean, his mother watched alone in a small room, hand over her mouth, whispering her son's name through tears. Joshua walked off that stage changed forever. Not because of fame, but because he proved that honoring where you come from can take you farther than trying to be someone else. He reminded the world that even a child's voice can carry the soul of a nation. If this story touched your heart, don't scroll away. Like this video to show your support, subscribe to the channel for more stories that inspire and uplift, and share this with someone who needs a reminder that courage, pride, and love can change lives. Because sometimes, all it takes is one brave voice to make the whole world listen. Before you blink, before you even decide whether to skip or stay, something grips your heart and refuses to let go, because this is not just a performance, it's a moment where a child's voice reminds the world what courage, sacrifice, and pride truly sound like. The stage of America's Got Talent shimmered with lights, but at the center stood a small Filipino boy named Daniel, only 10 years old, dwarfed by the massive theater and millions of eyes watching around the world. His shoes were slightly scuffed, his suit borrowed and carefully pressed by hands that had known far harder work. Daniel swallowed hard as he looked at the judges. This was the farthest he had ever been from home, from the narrow streets where he grew up, from the tiny house where his dreams were born. Daniel came from a fishing village where mornings smelled of salt and diesel fuel, and nights echoed with laughter mixed with exhaustion. His father went out to sea before sunrise, his mother stitched clothes late into the night. Money was always tight, but love was never lacking. When Daniel sang, everything else disappeared. He learned to sing Lupang Hinirang not from a music teacher, but from watching his neighbors stand proudly every flag-raising ceremony, even when life felt unfair. To Daniel, the anthem wasn't just tradition, it was strength. When he announced he would sing the Philippine national anthem, the audience murmured softly. It wasn't in English. It wasn't flashy. Simon Cowell leaned forward slightly, curious but unconvinced. Daniel closed his eyes, took a breath that seemed too big for his small chest, and began. The first note floated gently, almost shy. But then something extraordinary happened. His voice carried emotion far beyond his age, pure, aching, and honest. Each line felt like a confession, like a prayer spoken out loud. As he sang about the beloved land, faces in the crowd began to change. Smiles faded into silence. Phones lowered. Hearts opened. Daniel remembered the nights his father came home empty-handed, the times his mother skipped meals so he could eat. He remembered singing during blackouts, his voice echoing in the dark. All of that poured into the song. By the time he reached the final verse, his voice rose, not loud, but powerful, steady like a promise kept against all odds. The last note lingered in the air. No one clapped at first. The silence was heavy, emotional. Then, slowly, the audience stood. Applause exploded through the theater like thunder. Daniel's hands shook as tears streamed down his face. He hadn't expected this. He had only wanted to make his parents proud. The camera cut to Simon Cowell. His eyes were wet. His voice trembled when he spoke. I didn't understand every word, he said quietly, but I understood everything you meant. He paused, wiping his face. That was one of the most honest performances I've ever seen. The crowd erupted again as Simon stood, clapping above his head, no longer the unbreakable judge everyone knew. Across the ocean, in a small living room in the Philippines, Daniel's parents cried uncontrollably, neighbors cheering around them. In that moment, their sacrifices found meaning. Their son's voice had crossed borders, languages, and expectations. Daniel walked off the stage knowing his life had changed, but more importantly, knowing he hadn't abandoned who he was to get there. He showed the world that pride in your roots can lift you higher than fear ever could, and that even the smallest voice can move the strongest hearts. If this story made you feel something, don't let it end here. Tap like to support stories that inspire, subscribe to the channel for more moments that restore faith and dreams, and share this video so others can feel what you just felt. Because sometimes, one child, one song, and one brave moment are enough to remind the world to listen before you decide to scroll, before your thumb moves away, pause, because what you're about to hear isn't just a song or a talent show moment, it's the kind of story that sneaks into your heart quietly and stays there long after the screen goes dark. The America's Got Talent stage was glowing, alive with energy, but standing alone under the lights was a Filipino boy named Aaron, barely 11 years old. His feet shifted nervously, his fingers gripping the microphone as if it were the only thing keeping him steady. The audience saw a child. What they didn't see was the weight he carried, the dreams of a family, the voice of a nation, and the courage it took just to stand there. Aaron grew up in a crowded neighborhood where houses were close and privacy was rare. His father worked construction jobs that came and went. His mother sold food outside their home, waking up before dawn every day. Some nights, dinner was shared carefully so everyone had enough. But every morning at school, no matter how tired or hungry, Aaron stood tall and sang Lupang Hinirang. He believed the words. He believed in dignity, in hope, in loving a land that tested you but never stopped being home. Music became his escape. When storms flooded their streets and power went out, Aaron sang in the dark. When his parents argued quietly about money, he sang softly in his room. His neighbors started listening. Teachers noticed. Someone recorded him on an old phone. That video traveled farther than anyone expected, across oceans, across borders, all the way to an audition invitation that felt too big to be real. Now he stood on the AGT stage. Simon Cowell watched him closely, unreadable. When Aaron said he would sing the Philippine national anthem, there was hesitation in the room. It wasn't familiar. It wasn't commercial. It wasn't safe. But Aaron nodded, took a deep breath, and began. The first note was pure and trembling, like the beginning of a confession. The theater grew quiet. His voice didn't shout, it spoke. Every word carried longing, pride, and pain that no child should have to understand, yet somehow did. As the melody unfolded, the audience leaned in, drawn by something deeper than sound. This wasn't about talent. This was about truth. Aaron thought of his parents watching on a small screen back home, neighbors gathered shoulder to shoulder. He thought of standing in muddy streets during flag ceremonies, still singing with his hand on his chest. By the final verse, his voice rose with strength and conviction, no longer shaking. It filled the room, steady and brave. When the last note faded, silence wrapped the theater. Then one person stood. Then another. Soon the entire audience was on its feet, applauding through tears. Aaron's eyes widened as emotion overwhelmed him. He bowed, unsure, crying openly now. Simon Cowell stood too. His voice cracked as he spoke. I've heard thousands of performances, he said, blinking back tears, but very few feel this honest. He paused, visibly emotional. You reminded us that music doesn't need translation when it comes from the heart. The audience erupted again. Back in the Philippines, Aaron's parents cried uncontrollably, hugging each other as neighbors cheered. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night suddenly had meaning. Their son hadn't just sung, he had been heard. Aaron walked off that stage forever changed, not because of fame, but because he stayed true to who he was. He proved that honoring your roots is not a weakness, that courage can live in the smallest voices, and that sincerity can shake even the hardest hearts. If this story touched you, don't let the moment fade. Like this video to support stories that uplift and inspire, subscribe to the channel so you never miss moments like this, and share it with someone who needs to believe that dreams, no matter where they begin, can reach the world. Because sometimes, one child's voice is enough to remind us all to listen. Before your finger moves, before you decide this is just another video, stop, because what unfolds here is the kind of moment that silences a room, blurs the line between nations, and reminds you why some voices don't just sing, they carry souls. The lights of America's Got Talent burned bright, sweeping across a packed theater buzzing with excitement. In the center stood a small Filipino boy named Elian, barely 12 years old, his frame thin, his posture stiff with nerves. The microphone trembled slightly in his hands. He looked out at the judges, at Simon Cowell's familiar unreadable stare, at thousands of strangers waiting to judge him in seconds. What they didn't know was that Elian had already faced harder judgments in life, poverty, separation, doubt, and still chose to stand there. Elian grew up in a small inland town where roads turned to mud during heavy rains and dreams often felt like luxuries. His mother worked overseas, cleaning houses so her children could stay in school. His father took any job he could find, loading trucks, fixing roofs, working under the sun until his back ached. Elian learned early that love sometimes meant absence, and sacrifice didn't always come with applause. Music became the one place where everything made sense. Every morning at school, during the flag ceremony, Elian sang Lupang Hinirang with his hand pressed firmly to his chest. He sang not because he had a perfect voice, but because the words made him feel strong. He sang thinking of his mother far away, of his father's tired hands, of a country that had endured so much and still stood proud. At home, during power outages, Elian sang by candlelight. His neighbors would pause, listening quietly through open windows. Someone recorded him once. Just a short clip. That video traveled farther than anyone expected. Weeks later, an invitation arrived: America's Got Talent. The family stared at the email in disbelief. They had no money for big dreams, but they had faith. And sometimes, faith is louder than fear. Now Elian stood on that massive stage. When asked what he would sing, his voice was soft but steady. The national anthem of my country. A murmur rippled through the audience. Simon raised an eyebrow. It wasn't a safe choice. It wasn't familiar. But Elian nodded and closed his eyes. The first note floated out, fragile but pure. The room grew quiet. His voice wasn't trying to impress, it was trying to be honest. Line by line, emotion deepened. His voice carried longing, resilience, and love shaped by distance. The audience leaned forward, drawn in by something they couldn't explain. Some didn't understand the language, but everyone understood the feeling. Elian remembered his mother watching from a small phone screen overseas, likely holding back tears so her co-workers wouldn't see. He remembered his father standing proudly even when life bent him low. By the final verse, Elian's voice rose, clear, unwavering, filled with pride. It echoed through the theater, strong and fearless. When the last note faded, silence held the room. Then applause erupted, loud, unstoppable. People stood, hands over mouths, tears streaming. Elian's knees nearly buckled as emotion overwhelmed him. He bowed, crying openly now, overwhelmed by a response he never imagined. Simon Cowell stood slowly. His eyes were glassy. "I didn't know your language," he said, voice breaking, "but I felt every word." He paused, collecting himself. That was one of the most sincere performances I've ever witnessed. The crowd roared as Simon wiped his eyes, no longer hiding the impact. Across the ocean, Elian's family and neighbors cried together, cheering in a small living room. In that moment, the distance between them disappeared. The sacrifices mattered. The waiting mattered. Their boy had been heard. Elian walked off the stage not as someone chasing fame, but as someone who honored where he came from. He reminded the world that you don't have to change who you are to be seen, that pride in your roots can lift you higher than fear ever could, and that even the smallest voice can move the strongest hearts. If this story touched you, don't let it end here. Like this video to support stories that inspire hope, subscribe to the channel so you never miss moments that remind us of our shared humanity, and share this with someone who needs to believe again. Because sometimes, one child, one song, and one brave moment are enough to change everything.